Breaking news. The political world was shaken to its core when Congresswoman Nancy Mace stepped in front of the cameras with what she described as irrefutable proof of corruption at the hands of Jasmine Crockett. Holding up a thick folder of documents, Mace declared that Crockett had siphoned off millions of taxpayer dollars through shady contracts and shell companies. The words hit like a thunderclap. Reporters scrambled to capture every detail. Cameras zoomed in on the papers in her hands, and within minutes the headlines were everywhere. Mace unveils bombshell evidence of Crockett corruption. The allegations were stunning, not just because of the numbers involved, but because of the directness of the attack. "This is not speculation, this is fact," Mace said firmly, her voice echoing across the chamber. "The American people deserve to know the truth about who is stealing from them, and today I am exposing that truth." Behind her, aides nodded gravely as if the scandal were already undeniable. The immediate reaction was explosive. Social media platforms lit up with hashtags like #CrockettScandal, #Million-Dollar-Theft, and #MaceExposesTruth. TikTok and Twitter filled with clips of Mace slamming the folder onto the podium, a gesture replayed thousands of times with dramatic captions. Commentators speculated that this could be the end of Crockett's rising career. Pundits on conservative networks celebrated the revelation, calling it the beginning of accountability. Meanwhile, liberal commentators looked stunned, struggling to defend Crockett in the face of what appeared to be hard evidence. For a moment, the balance seemed to shift. Jasmine Crockett, once a fearless critic, now looked cornered, fighting for her reputation and her political survival. But what the public didn't yet know, and what would soon explode into the next chapter of the scandal, was that these so-called documents held by Nancy Mace were not what they seemed. The fallout from Nancy Mace's explosive press conference was immediate and overwhelming. By nightfall, her accusations against Jasmine Crockett dominated every major news outlet. Cable networks ran wall-to-wall coverage, with pundits dissecting the supposed evidence as if it were already a proven fact. CNN plastered the headline, "Millions Missing?" across the screen, while Fox News triumphantly declared, "Crockett Caught." Every angle of Mace slamming that folder onto the podium was replayed in slow motion, accompanied by ominous background music and commentary suggesting the scandal could destroy Crockett's career. Talk radio hosts railed against corruption, callers demanded investigations, and even international outlets picked up the story, portraying it as a massive blow to American politics. On social media, the frenzy was even more intense. Hashtags like #CrockettExposed, #ThiefInCongress, and #NancyDelivers surged to the top of trending lists. Twitter feeds were flooded with side-by-side images of Crockett speaking passionately in past debates, contrasted with Mace's folder of supposed evidence. TikTok creators produced dramatic edits with captions like, "The Fall of Jasmine Crockett," while YouTube live streams speculated on her possible resignation. The pressure mounted quickly. Voters flooded Crockett's office with phone calls demanding answers. Commentators warned that if the allegations were true, it could end her political career overnight. Fundraising for her opponents spiked as donors seized on the scandal to pour money into campaigns that promised clean politics. Even within her own party, whispers began to spread. Some Democrats urged patience, asking the public to wait for the facts. Others, clearly spooked by the headlines, began quietly distancing themselves, fearing guilt by association. It seemed that in a single day, Crockett had gone from rising star to embattled politician fighting for survival. But the frenzy, as powerful as it was, rested entirely on the credibility of the documents Nancy Mace had brandished. And while the media machine treated them as gospel, a handful of sharp-eyed observers had already noticed inconsistencies, small details that didn't quite add up. Details that, once revealed, would flip the entire scandal on its head. For 48 hours, the nation buzzed with talk of Jasmine Crockett's supposed corruption. But as journalists, analysts, and watchdog groups dug deeper into the evidence unveiled by Nancy Mace, cracks began to appear. What had seemed like airtight proof started to unravel. It began with a small but critical detail. The letterhead on one of the documents didn't match the official style used by the government agency it claimed to represent. At first, skeptics were dismissed as partisan defenders, but then more discrepancies emerged. Dates didn't align, signatures were misspelled, some figures referenced programs that hadn't even existed at the time the documents were allegedly signed. Fact-checking organizations moved quickly. PolitiFact rated the documents as unverified and highly suspicious. ProPublica published a deep dive analysis highlighting glaring errors, including one contract number that traced back to a completely unrelated project. By the next morning, the tide began to turn. CNN aired a segment bluntly titled, "Fake Evidence?" while the Washington Post ran the headline, "Mace's documents under scrutiny." Even Fox News, which had celebrated the bombshell, was forced to host panels questioning the authenticity of the files. The hashtags shifted almost overnight. Hashtag fake files, hashtag Mace mistake, and hashtag justice for Crockett started trending. Jasmine Crockett seized the moment. Standing before reporters, she didn't shout or rant. Instead, she held up a copy of one of the so-called evidence documents and calmly pointed out its flaws. This invoice lists a company that didn't even exist until 2 years after it was supposedly paid, she said, drawing gasps from the crowd. This isn't evidence. This is fraud. And it's insulting, not just to me, but to every American who expects honesty from their leaders. The effect was electric. Clips of Crockett dismantling the documents went viral, shared with captions like, "She just destroyed Mace in 30 seconds. Memes mocked Nancy Mace for presenting evidence that collapsed under the slightest scrutiny. Analysts called it one of the most humiliating political blunders in recent memory. By the end of the day, it was clear. The so-called bombshell had imploded. What was meant to end Jasmine Crockett's career had instead put Nancy Mace's credibility in question. And Crockett wasn't finished. She was about to deliver a final blow that would turn a scandal into a triumph. By the time the documents had been exposed as fake, Jasmine Crockett was no longer just defending herself. She was on the offensive. Standing before a packed press conference, she delivered what commentators would later describe as the most devastating clapback of her career. "Nancy Mace thought she could end my career with lies," Crockett began, her voice calm but commanding. But what she really exposed was her own desperation. Those documents weren't evidence. They were fiction. And every American deserves to know that the people sworn to serve them are willing to manufacture lies instead of facing the truth. Reporters leaned forward as she held up the supposed evidence folder, now a national symbol of political embarrassment. "This is not proof of corruption," she said, dropping it onto the podium with a sharp thud. "This is proof of how low some will go when they have nothing real to stand on." The room erupted in applause, an unusual but telling break in protocol. Crockett didn't stop there. She looked directly into the cameras, addressing not just her audience in the room, but the millions watching at home. "I will not be intimidated. I will not be silenced. And I will not allow anyone to tell the American people a lie this big without a fight." Social media lit up instantly. Hashtags like hashtag Crockett strikes back, hashtag Mace exposed, and hashtag truth wins soared to the top of trending lists. TikTok creators spliced Crockett's fiery takedown with dramatic music, racking up millions of views in hours. Twitter users declared, "This is how you bury a fake scandal." Political analysts agreed that the moment had flipped the narrative completely. CNN called it a masterclass in political counterattack. MSNBC described Crockett as emerging stronger than ever. Even conservative outlets struggled to spin the disaster, with one Fox News commentator admitting, "This was a self-inflicted wound for Nancy Mace, and Crockett just poured salt into it." By the end of the week, fundraising for Crockett had skyrocketed. Her approval ratings hit new highs, and Nancy Mace found herself under investigation for knowingly distributing falsified documents. What began as a supposed career-ending scandal had transformed into Crockett's greatest political victory. History will likely remember it as the day a desperate attack turned into a defining moment, when Jasmine Crockett proved that truth, delivered with strength, can not only survive a lie, but utterly destroy it.